Our next speaker is Christopher Dell, who is a professor for urban design theory at Hafencity University in Hamburg. He is also a composer, and his work focuses on improvisation as a creative tool for urban transformation. He is a head of the Institute for Improvisation Technology in Berlin, and he's going to give us a performing lecture.
Absolutely, because we understand that we try to connect different disciplines, we try to connect theory and practice, we try to connect lectures and performative aspects of that, so we're very happy that Christopher will, let's say, guide us through improvisation and thinking.
I think we're almost ready. Oh, no, it's ready.
Is aspects of theorization of practice. And in that sense, I am not having any examples because you gave so many examples. I think that's fantastic, so I'm just theorizing on it. But what I want to address definitely is some themes that came about also in what you discussed. Because when it is an Artecitya about creating new ways of making the city, it's also about creating new ways of understanding the city. And Dimitri also said it's about convincing and renegotiating. So if you want to convince, and Christoph has laid it out, you need to create visibility. And certain ways of new understanding that are connected to new ways of visibility, or as Rainer has put it, like a performative participation would also mean that the visibility can be also performative in that sense. And that leads to a lot of different questions. And that's what my talk will be about, not about solutions, but about questions. And the central theme is motivated by the interest in the social production of space and its theorization in the spatial sciences. That also should mean that the way the production of space is thought is connected to a new way of thinking the spatial sciences and to reframe the self-understanding of the spatial sciences and also reframing their way of creating visibility. Because it's absolutely clear especially with Christoph's talk, you see a complete change in the way you show things. There's a mix, a radical mix then between isometry, you have a comic, you have a photograph, you have a collage, you integrate the isometry into the collage and all kinds of things. You hybridize the visibility to kind of create what this morning was told about unlearning as an important aspect of the documenta. Unlearning means also creating unseeing or creating new ways of seeing. And in that respect, it's very important for me to also ponder about the fact that this symposium itself, created by Lydia and Sotiris, and also as Sotiris has already indicated, is itself an exhibition. It's not a coincidence that the makers of this symposium are curators. And that means that this is not a normal symposium where I normally give a lecture and you take the display for granted. How we sit doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The content is there, maybe on the wall somewhere, and that's it. And I just transport the content. Now, with that context of the curation, it changes completely, because everything we do is what you could say with a performative display. And it's very hard for me to read it as such while doing it. And that means that's the same with the city. It's hard for us to read the city while we are doing it when we take into account that we make the city. In that sense, there was a fantastic lecture you gave on the understanding of labor, of production in the political economy. But there's also another more artistic or theoretical meaning, and I was looking here on the floor, and there was, for example, somebody wrote, "Nous voulons le droit à l'œuvre et pas le droit au travail." Means we want to right to work and not to labor. Or here's another artist, not the territory of the artist, means this way to claim the right to work is connected to a territory. It's a special question. Now, that leads to the fact that we have to kind of renegotiate the notion of production itself. When I listen to the talks, I always hear the word production. It's a production of work, it's a production of a project, it's a production of knowledge, production of meaning, production of visibility, production of an exhibition. But the notion production itself, we cannot take for granted, as you have laid out. So in that sense, there is a kind of dichotomy between work and production that has not been tackled yet. I just ask about it. I don't dissolve it. But it is connected to a display and how we create a display on what we regard as work. And that will then lead maybe also to my 6 points about the working city. I don't know if I get there, because the forum is closed 15 minutes, but we learned this morning that the forum, according to Oscar Hansen, should be open. So I'm having an open forum while the forum is closed, and I think that's a normal thing nowadays, that you negotiate between open and not open, and not give up. But sometimes maybe you are not winning. But don't take it serious. But take it very serious for yourself as a practice, as a mediation, as you have well laid out. So the notion of the production of space is a concept widely used in urban studies today. However, while laying the emphasis on the definition of space, one basic dimension is hardly thematized, the specific definition of production. This is ever more astonishing, since this production of space cannot anymore be modeled after a rational action theory like the political economy would do. That you have a rational idea and you plan. Even Marx said that there's this bee and she does it, and there's a plan, and then somebody builds a house and does it after a plan. One could claim that production can be rational and teleological, but also the opposite. And one could conclude that in this opposition lies potential. But could it not also be possible that this opposition is altogether misleading? How can one explain the non-teleological, undetermined realm of the actions that constitute urban space in a constructive manner? Because that's the idea. Even though it's full of poetics and maybe non-teleological, it's still constructive. It still works. And that's why Henri Lefebvre says the urban reality today looks more like chaos and disorder, albeit one conceals a hidden order than an object. While Lefebvre assumes that in order to analyze the order and disorder of the urban, one should not be examined, or the urban should not be examined through contemplation, but through what you call urban practice. And that's why Henri Lefebvre calls the city not an object, but a virtual object. It's a very complicated, maybe one could tackle this a little bit with the notion of Gilles Deleuze diagram, which would mean that instead of proposing a shallow imitation of reality, which is like the digital, the Deleuze understanding of the diagram aims at the reality of the virtual, its structural aspects. That means being ingrained in every performative event. Structure as virtuality offers the potential to work constructively with disorder. This is just rather an assumption, but it's about possibility, options, and potential. Now, there was one theoretician who worked heavily on this notion of possibility, and there was Hannah Arendt. And I just lay you out the first page of The Human Condition, where she has the three notions of activity, which is labor, work, and action. Now, for her, labor is the activity which corresponds to the biological process of the human body, whose spontaneous growth, metabolism, and eventual decay are bound to the vital necessities produced and fed into the life process by labor. One could say that's dwelling. Yeah, we just dwell around in the city. Oh, it's just down there, it's a slave thing. It's just reproduction. It's not interesting. Then work, so the next level is a metaphysical ladder. Next is work is the activity which corresponds to the unnaturalness of human existence, which is not embedded in and whose mortality is not compensated by the species of ever-recurring life cycles. Work provides an artificial world of things distinctly different from all natural surroundings. So that's this old nature-culture opposition, but this takes place in work, and that's what we normally, I think, understand under production. Is this level, and maybe lower we say it's reproduction. So it's not creative at all. But yeah, it's very tricky, because at the same time the creative industry thinks also it's in the production sense busy. So the third term is action, the only activity that goes on directly between men without the intermediary of things or matter, corresponds to the human condition of plurality, to the fact that men, not men, live on the earth and inhabit the world. While all aspects of the human condition are somehow related to politics, this plurality is specifically the condition of all political life. And I think what is at stake with your title, work, is that you are trying to uplift work, and to transcend, to get it into a transcendental mode, which is here action. To show that in every work there is the potential for action, for being political, for changing things. It's not only the production. So, but that makes it very complicated. One could argue against Hannah Arendt that her model is way too simple, or it's very too hierarchic. But one can go with Arendt that if you take it as a matrix, it could inform to reconsider what we understand of the production of space, then to check on these different examples that you gave, and to show in these examples at certain points what does happen. When is it only labor? When is it transcendental? Or when does the same thing that is normally just labor become through a certain visibility to a transcendental state to open up possibilities? Exactly what this example that you gave with the street art, which is normally the lowest of labor there is for some people. But then suddenly it gets up in value without any work, and just with the cultural happening. It's the same for me, for example. I live in Kreuzberg, and without any work, the real estate went up. Yeah, I didn't contribute to it with hard labor and Mühe, as you would say, but I just hung around, and it got more and more. It was great. So that is something I will not talk about. The housing crisis and also refugee crisis is not what I talk about, but I think this is all connected to it. Now, the next point is a display, because one you could see that to challenge the hierarchy means to create new modes of visibility, and that's, I think, what is the whole template of this exhibition symposium about. So I want to ponder a bit about the display discussion. One could say that current discussions and qualification of the term exhibition as well as display indicates a new reflection of displaying processes, practices, and histories. I mean, this is taking more place in the arts, and in architecture we are a bit late, I think, yeah? Like always, we are late. There is this potentially and placement already? Oh, okay. So then there's a whole display and that I wanted to go about. Then there are certain points. Okay, now I'll go fast. So the little dip. So the little dip. So display is making a space in order to make a setting of humans and things public. Also means to create a setting of publicity or to assemble spectators, to create a setting where making of space itself can be addressed and become a contested field, like a performative asset, to create an imaginary about the project or the displayed setting and its modes of production, like a performative plan. I mean, one could say that the way also to instigating the poetics is a bit of trying to put this imaginative or imaginary into the political, as I understood it. And the building, like a site or territory, as would say, becomes a performative display, as Rainer has shown. So I have 6 points, I'm very fast. One is that city is not absolute, it's dependent on how we look at it and which gazes we use to look at it. So every research on the city is an articulation in itself, and we have to consider these articulations as displays. Then the second is that the producing space is democratic, because everybody produces space, but there's the third point, we don't know how we produce space because we have no visibility yet to understand this production. That's why we can't really tackle the knowledge of it. That's why we need new modes of education to understand what we do actually when we do it. And that's connected to the fourth point, the new medialities that go and the ways of representation, which also the last Biennale in architecture has shown. I mean, there was radical how many different ways of showing things. Every project had a different way of display itself. That was the most important point of the whole politics of it. The fifth point is we do not think about invention anymore, but to think about what we do with the existing that we had not really yet understood. And I think that's the most important thing, to understand the use of the city, to understand what we do. And then the sixth point that then leads to how to read the potentialities, coming back to Hannah Arendt, to read the potentialities out of the existing without a postulate of a new utopia. Okay, in that sense, also when I play, you can see my playing as a paradox intervention, but also you could see as a display of an action, because this music is like Hannah Arendt would say, it has no use. It's purely political, it's the same in itself. But at the same time, maybe it has a use to display something. And then it gets to another level to start to think about what then in the late Hannah Arendt was thematized, the faculty of judgment, which is the most important thing of Hannah Arendt, the faculty of judgment. And that's where politics and aesthetics come together, because in politics and aesthetics, we decide on what appears for us as a world.